My name's Mark Hannaford. I'm the founder of World Extreme Medicine, and welcome to the WEM podcast. You know, if you're a doctor, nurse, paramedic, or indeed any healthcare professional who has an interest in humanitarian, disaster, expedition, or extreme medicine, then this is most certainly the podcast for you. In this episode, we're talking to Ilan Moss, the filmmaker who recently won the World Health Organization's prize for Best Film about his film focused on sleeping sickness in Central Africa, entitled A Doctor's Wish. And it's certainly a film that you should watch if you've got 10 minutes. It's available on YouTube, and we'll have it in the show notes at the end. Ilan is based in New York and works as a filmmaker, social advocate, and a change maker. And we're delighted to have him on the show with us today. Ilan, it's a real pleasure to meet you today, have you to join us on the Webcast. As I said, it was inspired by watching your amazing film, A Doctor's Wish, about sleeping sickness in Central Africa.
So thanks so much for having me. My name is Ilan Moss. I'm here in New York right now, but I spent a lot of my time working around the world for the Drugs for Neglected Diseases initiative. So we're a not-for-profit drug development organization founded by Doctors Without Borders after they won the Nobel Prize in 2003. And I guess I help lead on our storytelling efforts. So how to tell the story of the world's most neglected diseases and the doctors and researchers trying to develop medicines for them.
So Ilan, I was struck by watching your movie this week, which won a prestigious prize awarded by the World Health Organization. It's entitled A Doctor's Dream, and it's a story of curing sleeping sickness in the Congo. It's an amazing story, and it shows what passion, what inspiration, what having a grand vision can achieve when you put your mind to it. It would be great to hear about how you got involved in that story.
Yeah, so thanks. So I guess in this case, I'm really the storyteller. And myself and a team from South Africa. So this is a production company called Scholars and Gentlemen. And we made a film about this disease and about the doctors that treat this disease to celebrate an achievement. And this was a pretty big achievement that happened a few years ago. So it was the approval of the first ever all oral treatment for sleeping sickness. So it's a simple pill that you take a couple times a day for 10 days. Well, actually a couple times a day for the first 5 days, and then a single pill after. Now this is a huge achievement because this is a disease, more than so many of these infectious diseases out there. It has a horrible, terrible history of some of the worst treatments you can possibly dream of. Treatments that caused people to scream out in pain as they were injected because they were based on arsenic. Treatments that were really heavy, needed to be lugged through the rainforest to reach the patients that are affected by sleeping sickness, and treatments that killed people. So this is a famous treatment that sort of, I think, has gone down in a lot of history books. It was called melarsoprol, and it was based on arsenic. So this is a treatment that was developed during the times of the Belgian Congo to treat sleeping sickness, which was affecting a lot of colonists at the time, and obviously a lot of Congolese. It is effective in killing the parasite. It's based on arsenic, but it also kills the patients. So around 1 in 20 patients, there's there's obviously, different views. There's not really any solid evidence on what happened, but doctors will tell stories about, injecting the treatment into their patients, and sometimes they literally slip away in front of their eyes. Those that survived were cured, but they even had horrible side effects from the treatment itself, neurological side effects. So this is about a nightmare disease, sleeping sickness. So obviously evokes sleep, but it's not just like malaria. Malaria, obviously, we all know about malaria. In its acute phase, sleeping sickness is a lot like malaria, fever, headaches, but in this really at the final stage of sleeping sickness, turns people, it has these terrible psychiatric and neurological symptoms. People sleep during the day, they're awake at night, but I think some of the scariest have to do with aggression. People become really unnaturally aggressive. I've heard stories in the DRC about children getting in fights at school, families, wives hitting husbands, husbands hitting wives. One story that really always affected me is of a preacher took an axe up against his congregation. Then there's just this whole slew of other just really scary symptoms that come along with the disease that have always sort of confounded the doctors that have tried to treat them, because it is in the most remote areas of Central Africa. So this is a disease that's transmitted by the bite of a tsetse fly. It usually bites around rivers and forested areas of Central Africa. It's often mistaken for malaria because in its first stage, it'll manifest itself, present itself like malaria or some other, febrile illnesses. So it'll lead actually doctors or even, local village officials to think that it's malaria or that it's some kind of, illness linked with malaria. They'll give the patient malaria drugs, they won't work. Or sometimes the disease will just literally go away. These patients or these people will, the symptoms will go away. They think they were cured, but it comes back. As the parasite goes into your neurological system, it goes in your cerebral spinal column, it goes up to your brain, and that's when that second stage kicks in. So if you can imagine someone who's received malaria medicines, the fever went down, people said, okay, he or she is cured. Then a year later, it comes back. These people are often accused of witchcraft. They're often, ostracized by their community. So it's a.
And I imagine in a traditional setting, it would seem almost with the neurological outcomes that they've been taken over by the devil because of their anger and their aggression. So culturally, it would have been quite a dramatic impact.
Yeah. Yeah, so often we've heard witchcraft is people are often accused of having, had a curse on them or being involved in witchcraft. It just creates all sorts of issues. And I think it's important to say this is a disease that's gone, if you look at the sort of curves, it's gone up and down. So horrible outbreaks at the during the Belgian Congo. So this is after King Leopold, which some of your audience probably knows about that history. But during the Belgian Congo, there was really big outbreaks. The Belgians did run massive disease or elimination campaigns. And I have to say, they'd come pretty close to eliminating the disease by 1960. Then the Belgians left. And because of just the general chaos the country was in after the Belgians left, it started to creep up slowly in the late 60s, then the 70s, 80s, until these huge conflicts hit at the time Zaire in the 90s, and we just saw massive increases, massive outbreaks. And that's when Doctors Without Borders came. That's when MSF, Doctors Without Borders, came, sent doctors to the Congo, to Sudan, which now South Sudan, but Sudan, Central African Republic, Uganda, to deal with these horrible refugee crises, these two great African wars. And the doctors were seeing these sleeping sickness cases because people were displaced. They were, collecting water by rivers. And the only treatment available at the time was the only treatment that ever existed, which was arsenic-based. So it was the frustration of these doctors that were, mostly from Europe, and MSF being MSF, they raised their voices and they said, look at this, why are we treating our patients? Why are we killing our patients? Well, what's the reason? It's because these people have been neglected from pharmaceutical innovation because there really is no incentive to develop a drug for these patients. The end result is we're injecting arsenic into our patients. So it was that clarion call from the field, from MSF, that led to the development, or led to the creation of my organization, which is the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. When MSF won the Nobel Prize, they used part of that money to create DNDi. So we were born from this frustration of doctors in the field and the DRC having to deal with sleeping sickness. But that's not what the film is about in some ways. We actually wanted to concentrate on the Congolese doctors, because sure, MSF came in the 80s and the 90s, but these doctors have been dealing with this ever since they started. And this one doctor, who's the subject of this film, Dr. Victor Kande, has been dealing with this his entire career. And these Congolese doctors, ever since the first outbreak started happening, I think in the 70s, they've been going out from Kinshasa, from the capital, all throughout this massive, incredible huge country, um, to these really remote areas, trying to deal with these outbreaks, often with very, very little in their medicine cabinet. They had the arsenic-based drug, but they certainly didn't have anything else. They certainly didn't have what MSF had when they came in. So it's
And,
this frustration.
and the transportation of the treatment was quite bulky in itself as well. So, you know, traveling
Yeah.
rurally like they were, that would have been difficult in itself to get to where it was needed.
Yeah, I mean, it was impossible. So some of the most affected area for sleeping sickness has always been this area called Bandundu, which is, if you see a map, it's the next province over from Kinshasa. So it's actually not directly in, you know, one of the big rainforests, or, you know, sort of a giant, massive Central African rainforest that covers parts of lots of northern DRC. It's plains, it's savanna. It's sort of crisscrossed by these tributaries of the Congo, and it is remote. It is in some ways even more remote than some of these areas around the river of the DRC. It just takes, you know, even with today's, you know, transportation, it takes you days and days to get out to these sites. You can't even get there by river. So it really defines remote. And then there was these sort of these zones of the DRC where you had these outbreaks. One of them is in the middle of the rainforest in the north. It's called Isangi. It's part of now Chopo province in the DRC. You know, it's a few days downriver from Kisangani, which is sort of the end of the navigatable Congo River. So it's extremely, extremely, extremely remote. And MSF actually they opened a site there in this town called Isangi to treat, this is a crazy story, but to treat the people fleeing the Rwandan genocide. So that fled all the way, you know the story, after 94.
Yeah.
They fled up the Congo River into the DRC. And so these were the Hutu. They were the, you know, part of the génocidaires, so involved in the genocide, but these were just women and children, nothing to do with the genocide. They had become refugees in the DRC, and they were being chased by groups from Rwanda deep inside the DRC, and a lot of them ended up in all the way down in the middle of the country in Isangi. And actually, MSF.
And their story in itself must have been incredible as well.
Yeah, and MSF opened up a site at this one hospital called Isangi to deal with these refugees that have traveled thousands and thousands of kilometers into the DRC, being chased by, you know, by these militias. And it was there that they found these cases, and found out this was actually a zone of, you know, heavy transmission of sleeping sickness. So just what these doctors had to deal with, again, the arsenic-based drug, just the lack of follow-up. When you gave these, you know, if you give these patients this arsenic-based drug, you need to follow up with them. I mean, I'm not a medical doctor, but I've worked with enough to know that you need
absolutely.
You need to, you know, ensure that you need to check up on their symptoms. I mean, there is a way to manage them after giving them. You know, if we were to give the arsenic-based drug in London, for example, there is a way you can manage, you know, side effects. Obviously, in the middle of nowhere in the DRC, it's hard. So,
well, and also from your film, you highlighted the fact that once treated with the arsenic-based drug, they then needed to stay in that clinic for a number of weeks, which, of course, if their family is quite a long way away and they're having to earn money for their family, perhaps maybe they're the main breadwinner, or indeed their family is having to bring food for them. That makes that quite a taxing, you know, quite a burden on a remote family.
yeah, so that's the interesting thing. So there was the arsenic-based drug, and MSF and DNDi together. So this is when DNDi was created. We were able to deliver a treatment. It's called NECT. You know, it's nifurtimox and fluorescein, which are two drugs. There's a whole backstory behind fluorescein, which I can tell in a second, or not. It's kind of a rabbit hole. But we were able to come up with a combination of this drug. But it's a 10-day course, but it's injectable. It doesn't kill you. It doesn't have the horrible side effect as arsenic. And that was rolled out, you know, over a decade ago. So that was a good, you know, and we discussed that in the film, that we were able to replace the arsenic-based treatment, thank goodness. Yet the only option involves 10 days of injections. It's actually 14 days, but 10 of those you have injections. It's 3 times a day. You need to stay in the hospital. So people are brought away from their fields. They can't, they obviously they can't be with their families in areas where there's subsistence farmers. That creates all sorts of havoc. And then just bringing this material, absolutely incredible. The fact that they've been able to do this. I mean, it's literally bringing these huge boxes of kit. The boxes itself, they're in the film. I'm making with my hands right now.
Yeah.
There's only enough treatment for 3 patients in that kit, and it literally goes on the plane to the plane to the to the vehicle, to the boat, to the vehicle, to the motorcycle. Then the last bit is usually done by hand.
And in your film, you've got it laid out, haven't you? I mean, it's just a massive, both medication, but also the equipment that goes with that. It's absolutely massive.
Yeah, it's massive. It is effective, and it's an injection. And I think the other problem with that drug is that, the other challenge with that drug is that it's recommended for the second stage of sleeping sickness. Now, for the first stage of sleeping sickness, there's another drug. What doctors had to do is give everyone a spinal tap in order to stage them, because the only way to know at what stage they are. So if they're at the first stage, then they give them another drug. If they're at the second stage, then they give this nifurtimox eflornithine combination drug. The only way to stage them, i.e. to find out, if they have the parasites in their cerebral spinal fluid, is to get a spinal tap, which is, I've heard different views of spinal taps. Obviously, a lot of people have had them. It's not the end of the world, but again, it does hurt a lot, and that people don't want to. When you tell people, listen, you've been diagnosed at the village level, you need to go in for your spinal tap at the hospital. A lot of people don't want to go.
I can imagine there's a degree of reluctance,
and it's just extremely. So it just complicates the situation. So what these doctors were facing, in these really remote areas, are just absolutely, absolutely incredible as far as the material needed, and then just the process that they need to go through.
One of the remarkable world firsts that's highlighted with the film is the fact that the clinical trials for the new treatment, which, as you said, was 1 tablet or a couple of tablets, was all done in Congo itself rather than back in a controlled research environment. I mean, that in itself is just a remarkable story, just all by itself. Take away everything else, but to mount that type of project in deepest Congo, if we can use that as a phrase, is truly remarkable, and speaks of the dedication of the clinicians involved and all the logisticians, and a remarkable story, and an incredible world first.
Yeah, I mean, in order to get a drug, so this drug was approved by the European Union. There's an agency within the European Union that approves drugs. So in the equivalent in the US is the FDA. But in order to get that approval, you need to do world-class clinical research. So according to, again, I'm not a medical doctor, so I know you have lots of audience that are. So sorry if I make any mistakes. I'm just a storyteller. But trials need to be conducted with, good clinical practice. So they need to follow these international guidelines. So there was a lot of work. I mean, it even just started with going to these sites and renovating them. So you could send samples. You could, you had lodging, so you could bring people in to spend a few days there working. And it's, we discuss it in the film. You can bring internet. The internet's really important because they're actually taking videos of these samples, during the trial to measure the parasite load, and they need to upload those videos and send them to a central data center. It's really would have been impossible without upgrading these sites, and they did them. And I think what's incredible is, so this is in an area of the DRC that's not actually in constant conflict. You've heard a lot about the Kivus, out there in the east. That would be very, very difficult, but these are still areas that have seen lots of conflict. So the fact that they were able to do this was incredible. It got almost impossible in the Central African Republic. So we did have trials there, but the conflict was just too much, and trials did have to be stopped because at some point, as you know, clinical trials involve lots of follow-up and going back and forth to hospital. And if you're putting patients in danger by this, just doing their follow-up, that can't happen. Whereas in these areas in the DRC, they weren't in active conflict, so it was just a matter of going out there and getting these patients. And it's just a testament to these health workers. That's why we were able to go there as a storyteller, And, there was this one woman in the film, her name is Charnel, and she's sort of one of the subjects of the film. You see her in this clinic at night, saying, Papa Doctor, she's in Lingala saying, help me. It's very disturbing. I mean, it's in the middle of the night. You have this woman, filmed with cell phone with this bad lighting. It's like out of a nightmare film. It's like found footage. And, she was this mild-mannered farmer. Every night they were saying she would just get up and dance and laugh, and it was kind of a thing out of a horror film. One of the doctors took this on his cell phone, and when we were sitting with him in Kinshasa, we were just we wanted to tell the story. We wanted to find some patients to tell the story, and we were just looking through all these files, and he had his whole desk spread up, all his phones. His name is Dr. Wilfried. He's a great guy. He's in the film as well. I want to show you this, and he pulled out his cell phone. He's like, there's because I was asking him about some of the symptoms. I'd seen in previous trips, I'd seen people that had just been diagnosed with sleeping sickness. It was obviously they were normal. And then I'd seen a few people at really the final stage, and it was something you wouldn't even want to show in a film, because they were basically on a bed shaking, and it's just not great stuff. I never really seen someone in that in between stage where they had these crazy psychiatric effects. And he said, these crazy neurological effects. And he said, you showed me the video. How is she doing now? And he said, well, she's great. She received the drug in the clinical trial and she's doing fine. I was like, well, can we contact her? And, so he pulls out the cell phone and he's there on the speakerphone with one doctor and then another doctor and another doctor, in Lingala and Kikongo in French. And an hour later, we found her. And she lived in the middle of the savannah of Bandundu. And so this is a testament to actually have that all recorded on video. Is a great little video where he's got like 3 phones and on the speaker, and mama, and it's really a testament to these people that they know their patients. They really care about their patients, and you'd think that sitting in Kinshasa, could you actually find this woman?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're really incredible.
And we don't want to take too many spoilers away from people watching the movie, but it's an amazing story of humanity. And as you said, people's passion, or clinicians' passions for their patients, and the fact that, as you said, they're back in Kinshasa, but they still care about the people they treated in the field. It is a remarkably human story. And I think you as a storyteller and a filmmaker got that across really, really clearly, which is, I think, one of the beauties of the film. Not only the story, but also the way that the story was portrayed. What are you working on next?
So that's a good question. The nice thing about this WHO film festival is we also got a grant. So, obviously we're an NGO, we raise money, mostly actually MSF are one of our biggest donors, which is great. But we have a large amount of funders. We have the sort of same spirit of independence as MSF, is we try not to rely too much on one funder. So we have this huge private fund now, foundations, governments, but obviously the money goes to R&D. So, we rely on companies like Scholars and Gentlemen, who did this for nothing, basically gave up their time to us, which we're really just grateful to them. So we rely on, on people that are willing to work for us. And then we have a lot of the talent in-house as well. The money from the WHO will actually be great. We want to reinvest that into filming something. It could go both ways. We're working on a film. So before this craziness happened, we had announced and there's actually a big article in the New York Times. It was on the front page of the New York Times on December 1st, 2019. We announced the first really ever strawberry tasting HIV medicine for kids. So HIV doesn't seem to be a neglected disease, but kids with HIV are horribly neglected because unfortunately children are still being born with HIV in Africa, despite efforts, to stop mother-to-child transmission. But there's very few being born in Europe and North America. So there have not been any adapted drugs for kids. The one drug that was available, again, the same story, the before and after. It's a solution called leponavir, and it's called Kaletra. It's leponavir and ritonavir. It's 2 really powerful antiretrovirals for children, and it's 40% alcohol. So mothers have to give this to kids, with a little syringe, and the kids spit it out, and they, doesn't even, a lot of times they loses its efficacy because they're spitting out the medicine. So again, DNDi to the rescue. We're trying to develop 4-in-1. Actually have it somewhere. I'll show it to you, but you can see the New York Times article, a 4-in-1 treatment, which is a little capsule, it's in a powder. So you remove it and you can stick it on food and give it to the child, and it has everything a child needs. We have been filming. We've been doing the same type of film. Right now, things are just slowed down because of COVID-19, but we're hoping that this treatment will get approved. It's been submitted to the FDA. We announced, that's what the New York Times article is about. We announced that it would be available for $1 a day for children. This is with an Indian generic company called Cipla. And we shot a film in Uganda, South Africa, and India, talking about, again, this fantastic partnership between doctors, researchers, patients, and in this case, an Indian company to develop medicines for kids. So same company in South Africa, a little bit of a different vibe, but we're hoping to make another short film. We are making a short film about this, and we're hoping that it'll also move people. It's a little different. It's more. It's about kids. It's about kids being left behind. The news that COVID-19 doesn't affect children as much has caused at least parents to act differently, maybe for better or for worse. But 300 kids die every day of HIV.
Yeah.
And when you go to this hospital outside of Uganda where we filmed, the coffin makers are still making little, kid-sized coffins, and those coffins are still for kids with AIDS, which they shouldn't be dying of that anymore. There are drugs, there are treatments. We're hoping to raise a little awareness about, something that's maybe not as considered as neglected as sleeping sickness, AIDS, or HIV/AIDS, but about kids that are suffering from it.
Ilan, you're making making amazing films. I mean, we're really interested in supporting World Extreme Medicine in terms of spreading the word and helping you do that. So it'll be great to stay in contact, to spread the news about your new films, and get you to present at the World Extreme, the WEM conference, so more people can hear about your work, but also gain inspiration themselves. That as medics going into the field, they do have a massive difference to make. Please stay in contact. I hope we get to meet personally at the Explorers Club in New York when these travel restrictions are lifted. But thanks for giving me your time today. It's been great talking to you and getting to meet you.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for all your great work. We really need it more than ever now.